decided, what if I chose from my daily writing, which is a daily practice for almost 12 years, and send you 2 poems, I send him 5, him 6, that kind of thing. And you respond to what you want to. So,
in whatever format.
So literally it opens with my writing to a Palestinian poet I work with. She was 5 then when she first stumbled, tripped, actually stubbed her toe. Would be even more precise, accurate. The stumbling, a blessing. The tripping, a revelation. Only the toe hurt. For weeks, in pain after this accident, of fate, this I think is an accurate description of what befell the child.
Hi, we're sitting with Naveen Kishore of Seagull Books in Calcutta and surrounded by beautiful bookshelves of pink, teal, green, all kinds of colors, and very beautiful books with very beautiful covers and titles like Hospital, and then you have Alice in Sussex and all kinds of books. And he has been sending us a lot of books and he has really helped us in our work, and we remain very grateful. And so we are here to talk to him about his work, independent publishing, and how does he go about finding these interesting books, and what does it take to run an independent publishing house in today's time and age. So Naveenji, if you can begin with firstly this book that you gave me yesterday, and it's very interesting.
The catalogue itself, yes.
The catalogue, and you were talking to me about the cover.
It's in Bangla. The cover is in Bangla. So basically, the Seagull catalogue has a kind of, if you like, history. Which is that each year, around February, March, I would typically reach out in the form of a poem or a provocation or a little text, sometimes just a letter, to various circles around me, circles of affection, authors, translators, booksellers across the world we work with, often other people's authors, क्योंकि उनसे दोस्ती है. And without any threat from any publishers, because they all know the Seagull catalogue is a safe space in many ways. And then I would send them this thing. Now you're sitting in Latvia or Hungary or France or Italy or Madras or wherever. आप अपनी language where you write. If you're moved by that, tangentially, or you photograph or you create an artwork. And this then is given to Shunandini, Seagull's designer and editor, literally 8 weeks before Frankfurt Book Fair. And then she designs it all. And so it is a political document in many ways. This year, I was kind of feeling between 7th October, between what was happening at Arjikor and all of this darkness, which now the world, you can't just say any particular part. So I decided, what if I chose from my daily writing, which is a daily practice for almost 12 years, and send you 2 poems, I send him 5, him 6, that kind of thing. And you respond to what you want to. So
in whatever format.
So literally it opens with my writing to a Palestinian poet I work with. And I give him 2 strange poems. Both are like bizarre dreams. He chooses one and he writes 2 poems as response in Arabic, which you then go to a translator and you get it translated. So that is then becomes this strange object. And the Hungarians, Slovaks, they all do the same thing. There's a wonderful piece by Romila, for example, where she's responding, I write a lot about fallen angels, which not necessarily in a biblical sense, but for me, they are the downtrodden. They're the original subalterns, if you like, that kind of thing.
That's true.
And then Shunanti does a masterpiece where she creates with the Bangla script, she brings the world darkness through all of the literature into this word Obhoya, the fearless, which is the name given to the Arjikor victim. So so
and
it's
also the rose.
Absolutely. So there's all this kind of stuff that happens. And
if you can read like a couple of lines, I mean, it's very interesting with yours trying to.
Yeah, I can tell you the start of the, so that you get an idea of the theme. So typically, for example, I write to GHASSAN ZAQTAN, and I say, the dear GHASSAN, and because I write to him and his wife together, dear Fatin, you're both constantly on my mind. I hope you're well, as is possible in these terrible times. I'm about to begin to reach out to friends for the annual Seagull catalogue, and I wanted to start with you in hope, but not in stress. I completely understand if this is not the time. Unlike the previous years when I used to share a single provocation with our community of affection, this year I've decided to write specific texts for the many individuals I'm inviting to contribute. Sometimes I may share more than one text. So here is a text I've chosen for you. She was 5 then, when she first stumbled, tripped, actually stubbed her toe. Would be even more precise, accurate. The stumbling, a blessing. The tripping, a revelation. Only the toe hurt. For weeks, in pain after this accident, of fate. This, I think, is an accurate description of what befell the child. The point being that if she hadn't fallen, tripped, stumbled would be more apt. Yes, she may not have discovered the rainbow. To be more accurate, precise even, she may eventually have stumbled upon it, but not so early in life, had the initial stumbling not taken place. The revelation would not have happened. As it turned out, she accidentally stepped on a landmine in a field full of rainbows shortly after the war, the one that had drifted into seizing out of sheer exhaustion, or to be precise and accurate, the war had stumbled into a roadblock. Yes, the warring nations had run out of their young. The young had all tiptoed into the field, the one with the landmines, and had been reincarnated as rainbows. For it is said that children who die young are reborn almost immediately as rainbows. I confess this may not be accurate or precise, but this is what I have heard. So, and then there's another one, and then he responds and says, I choose this, I choose that. And then he responds. So,
what a beautiful idea.
Yeah. So, for example, I sent, which was to Romila Thapar, and which had something to do, I think, with fallen angels, which is something I as I said, I tend to write about a lot. So I sent her this. It's called Gabriel. He proceeded to shape a coffin from suitably appropriate wood, one in which he hid all the letters of the alphabet in 2s and 3s, taking no chances. He carefully covered each letter in tiny but strong oilskins, so as to withstand the hot and the cold, the floods, the storms, the snow, the fires in the forest. He dug a grave, not his own, or that of a friend, or relative, or fellow author, or poet, just a grave, an ordinary one. Having completed his labor, he lay down in the coffin, the one with the alphabet, to rest. Digging a grave can prove to be hard work. And then she responds about angels, very sort of not historical at all in that sense. So unusual, almost poetic. And then you read it and suddenly you come across this word, farishta, which you and I may have grown up with. Our parents, grandparents talked about farishtas as in, wo ek farishta hai, or
like a good person.
A good person, but not just good, almost angelic. So that was interesting.
No,
so
all the angels have such beautiful
so this catalogue is in some way, it's like an ambassador of Seagull, whatever surrounds you's philosophy. The fact that we publish literally, genuinely, sincerely, without consideration of borders, because publishing is unfortunately fairly ghettoized into territories. Buy for UK, buy for India, buy for Pakistan, buy for America, rights exchanges. You can only publish here, but not here. we can take from you and publish there. We decided in 2005 that we would break out of that, because after all, the West has taught us this is a globalized world.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where
Now
your
the West is
location
going
is.
back on their word after Trump said.
So आपकी location अगर hindrance बन जाए, then it's empty.
And also, why should it be actually? So much good stuff.
So we decided to buy world rights for everything. At that point, I turned, कि भाई जैसे you asked me, how do you choose? What do you do? So I initially, this is 2005, therefore, when I went international, I turned to the literature that helped me in my older childhood and youth. Helped as in, there was, any kind of anxiety, darkness, things that happened where for people like me who can't reach out for the holy books, we reached out for literature.
Of course.
And in those days, all of this stuff I'm doing was available.
And how did you find, let's say this book, this thing called Love,
from the Arab list,
Exactly. So how do you go?
So that's what I'm saying. So after it all started, you start to trust other people. This is very important.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of what is usually happening.
Yeah, this trust.
Well, because you don't know so many languages. We publish in 23 languages. So after the initial attempt at publishing, say, from the French or German or Italian, where I first went to the dead authors.
Yeah.
It was 100 Years of Jean-Paul Sartre, so I went and found material because I had read him.
Yeah.
So I trusted it. Then I found a translator who used to translate him. That's important. You can't have somebody sitting in Calcutta at 2 rupees a word doing diplomatic letters.
Exactly.
So you have to go to the right person and pay that £100, 1,000 words or whatever. Gradually, the word spreads. Publishers elsewhere discover that you do things like this. And then you give freedom to your translators who become like your detectives, finding interesting things because they're on the ground, they're reading all the stuff, they know the authors. So trust, it begins with trust. And it stays with trust because once the translation comes. For example, when a book like this is offered to me, it's offered in the form of a 150-word
synopsis.
Like a little timpani, if you like, or a synopsis of the book.
Yeah.
So something has to ring a bell.
Yeah.
Right? Then sometimes now publishers will send you a translated chapter or two.
Yeah.
Or your instinct tells you, "Ye title bahut acha hai."
Yeah.
And then you go and you test the waters with the translator, and if they like it, then you buy the right and then you wait. Kyunki saal baad jab wo translation aati hai, that's that moment of revelation. Has it worked? Has it worked? Has it worked or not worked?
Yeah.
And in 600 books, we must have about, I think, 8 or 10 that haven't worked, which is not a bad thing.
Count at all.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but you have to trust it, and then you stay with that author as far as possible.
Yeah. You don't abandon.
Through the ups and downs. You don't do one book, ki bhi ye biki nahi. But it's such a beautiful book, get another one. Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that I think also happens. And the curatorial thing is a little collective exercise. I am the initial point of contact sometimes.
Yeah.
And then because we go to Frankfurt, Shulandari now slowly starts to get into it.
Yeah.
And Bishan. And so we're just 5 of us.
Wow.
So it's very easy for us. And we have no doors between each other's desks.
Yeah.
So we... for us to just walk across and say, yeah, this sounds good. What do you think this is what you do? So it becomes a kind of, without strategy, an intuitive, collective decision-making process.
Yeah, which is very interesting.
Right?
The other thing I wanted to, when you were reading out from your letter to the Palestinian poet, one thing I noticed that you kept using "to be precise." And you use it a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
I was reading it last night and I'm like, I'm going to ask him this question. What does it mean to be precise? Why do you use it so much?
No, I use it only in this one. I don't use it like,
like in this one.
Yeah,
because it's so
in this,
powerful,
because I'm telling a tale which is almost like a fable.
Yeah.
And I am also suggesting that I don't know this for sure. Mujhe kisi ne bataya hai.
Yeah.
So, but to be precise, yeah, aise hota hai. It's a little gesture.
It's a game that you have.
That's right. Just for that particular thing, it was just, it's hard to...
It's a very interesting way to kind of break the darkness.
Because what you're actually talking about is
difficult.
The children.
Yeah, and also difficult to talk about.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to talk about, but you're also talking in hope in a very strange way.
Yeah.
Except that,
and the rainbow, and in fact, you sent us these fables, remember?
Yeah.
And it's almost magic realism where these brother and sister they go and like
gathering light. Yeah. That was written when 2014 was happening, just before it was happening, and I was like really despairing.
Yeah.
And that's when I wrote, because the hope, you see, I don't set out to talk about children or a girl child or whatever.
Exactly.
It strangely just happens. It's almost an intuitive hope and hopefulness parallelly. Ki bhai hum kya kar rahe hain inko? And yet they are the ones who will bring us out, that kind of stuff. So, and also you have to remember that there is a dailiness to this writing where it's like you and I are having this conversation. So even that, I'm lucky that within my working day, I am allowed to write 4 lines or 40.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people talk to me, hey, writer's block ho gaya, ye hai, wo and all that. And my way of getting around that is that
just write.
You just write, of course, but say I'm writing you a letter. Now, your Outlook editor, I'm Naveen Kishore, publisher. Now, our letters have to have certain courteous boundaries, and I'm afraid I'm terrible with that.
Yeah.
So my letters to you would be like, my letters are love letters in terms of business or whatever. It doesn't matter to everybody. It's all about relationships. So sometimes in the writing to you about some issue, 2 lines jump karti hain. They become my little literary piece for that day.
Yeah.
Ke bhai, it makes sense to me independently.
Yeah, completely.
So the idea, therefore, is that riyaz karte jao.
In fact, you wrote a letter to us, and because I had asked you to write on this topic, and you said that you asked like a hopeless romantic like me for hope, and it was a very beautiful letter because the last line had this thing about taking the pain and turning all of that into resistance, because that's your resistance. And in fact, this publishing, these books, everything is resistance. So how do you do it?
So it's like, I'll tell you a moment, you're talking resistance and design, there was, we do these History for Peace conferences that Megha does, right? So, ek baar, the concluding event was Ravish Kumar. The 120 teachers, scholars, all of that stuff. And he comes on and does this. He does his wonderful thing in those days. And we had not met before, except on that occasion. But hall ke bahar, there was a book display and all the rest of it. तो वो ऊपर रहते थे, आके किताबें देखते होंगे, वो बाद में पता लगा. Suddenly in the middle of what seemed like an hour-long bhashan, he stops. And he pauses and he says, वो जो सुनंदनी है, there is no Sunandani there, because Sunandani is at the office. हम Tolleyganj Club के conference hall में, we are doing this conference. And then he talks about what you're asking. He suddenly goes into her designs, how he discovered the books in the foyer, and design as resistance. From book covers, he gets that, right? So, and then he comes with me, meets her, and the next morning he gets off the plane and writes a long Hindi blog only through books, because he doesn't know us well enough, and he interprets our entire philosophy, which is what this catalogue is about. So the important thing is that if your work and your despair or your anxieties with the life around you can take many shapes. आप एक barricade पे जाके you can do the street things, you can do whatever, but हमारा जो एक political stance है, it's always been to translate it into some form of action. So जब गुजरात हुआ था, उसके बाद we started Peace Works कि भाई go to young people and teach Bhaichara. It started like that, became History for Peace in the hands of somebody like Megha. Similarly, when you are turning that, I feel that any kind of trauma can be turned into a form of creativity. The theatre ne sikhaya tha. I came from the theatre, I used to design for the theatre, and that's always been in my life as a very useful source. So you don't label it as resistance at that moment when you're in the middle of it. You sense that you're going against the forces. So you're pushing back, back. For example, something simpler and less complicated, which is कि एक marketplace को लेके आपको अपनी TRPs और टारगेट ऑडियंसेस और ये कौन खरीदता है, ये किताब कौन पढ़ सकता है, who, forget it. If it works for 4 people, 6 people,
even
300,
1%, I think.
you know, the important thing is if you can figure out a way of continuously doing it,
Yeah.
and you build a corpus of so much of serious literature of this kind that it then starts to resist.
Yeah.
It pushes back,
Yeah.
and the market has to find you. This is what I
Yeah.
keep saying. The market has a duty to find you.
Yeah.
So the resistance is not just political.
No, it's all
The
kinds.
resistance is across the board.
No, that
And
is
I
true.
think all of it also is because there is a kind of hospitable, open way of welcoming whoever walks in through the door. And make, if you know, it's like you walk in and you say, Naveen, you're doing this, I have this little idea, and I'm listening to you and I'm seeing your passion and your idea, but I'm seeing 20 other possibilities with your idea,
Yeah.
which I'm not holding back, and we have a conversation about the idea and it becomes a project.
Completely.
You know, अब आप नहीं आते तो शायद वो नहीं होता.
Yeah.
So अब जैसे Arab list है, it happened like that.
Yeah.
Gayatri Spivak, a colleague of her, Hossam, came and he had this little shy thing about wanting to do an Arab list. I said, करो आप.
Yeah.
So he becomes a curator.
Yeah.
कोई इटली से मिलता है, वो कहता है मैं आपके पास ये list नहीं है. You know, so you're trusting.
Yeah, I think.
And I
trust is
keep
the
coming
project.
back to which people have stopped doing.
Yeah.
So if I let you down 6 times and the 7th time you come back and trust, that is what is important, right?
Yeah.
Not in some foolhardy way कि पागलों की तरह आप ये करी जा रहे हैं,
Yeah.
but because your essential faith in what is possible in this difficult
And in
time.
people actually
Yeah.
also.
And people are what they are. I mean,
Yeah.
being human means to screw up and, you know, be fallible, all of that stuff. But even being community within this
Yeah.
publishing world is not easy.
No.
अब जैसे जब कोविड हुआ था, some other publisher sitting in Delhi is author, but I love what you write in history. आपकी किताब निकल रही है और चारों तक पूरा माहौल एक अंधेरा सा है, कोई दुकानें नहीं चल रही. You know, it's like everything shut, but you're launching your book. So I reach out and say कि भी हमारे 32,000 की मेलिंग लिस्ट है, अपने पब्लिशर को बोलो मेलिंग कर दे. नहीं, मेलिंग कर दे. So you spread the word. अब पब्लिशर हैरान हो जाते हैं, हैरान होते हैं, not happily always. They get a little nervous कि इसे क्या चाहिए exchange में.
Yeah, people have that thinking, what is in
Right?
it for you? Why are you doing this?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is Hartosh Caravan, he's in the Seagull documentary that Pushan Kriplani made for 40 years. So he says that sometimes, why not accept the fact that maybe that is his only motive to
probably
want to be community, which is enough in itself.
Completely.
So then that, I think, is a constant search to be different ways of being together is in a publishing world, because it's the one place that doesn't need to be cutthroat.
Not at all. In fact, journalism.
How many times can I take away Vikram Seth or Amitabh Ghosh from you? I mean, at the end of the day, and how many millions will that make? It doesn't work like that. So it's not the...
No, and also the fact that people have things to say, and sometimes we cannot discover them for whatever language barriers, whatever barriers. Bridging that kind of very interestingly. In fact, when you started writing to us, we had never met before.
No. I was just admiring the
it was so beautiful, actually.
The shit you were doing, which was fantastic, and the covers, and I mean, it started like that, and then it felt that, bhai, ye to, in this whole popular world, she's trying to actually go against the grain. So I didn't know you, or I was just reaching out in that sense, and
And you helped us so much, and we were like, okay, now I must go to Calcutta and meet you finally, because this is only like WhatsApp and email and stuff. And some of the stuff that you've sent us is so beautiful, actually. And anytime, and I was actually telling somebody that, you know, they were like, oh, he's so helpful. I said, yeah, but maybe that's the motive, that he just wants it to be out there.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's not like there's a quid pro quo.
No.
And so it works.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever we have come to ask for anything, you've never said no. In fact, you connected us with him moments, and it's so beautiful to actually see this, talk about this, your group of people of affection, right? So for instance, Sudarshan Shetty, all kinds of people have helped us a lot, in fact, even in terms of a magazine which was journalism, but they trusted us enough to kind of give their artworks, like you choose whatever and you put it on the cover and we trust you with the interpretation. And that I thought was, and we came here yesterday and we were talking about it last night. It's so beautiful. Sudarshanji bought like some 7 books.
I know.
And every title is actually something. I mean, one could do like a whole thing on the, the circus commentary, unusual books. So I just wanted to also ask about the process of, let's say, selecting, let's say, 5 books, which you had no idea about. Because, we also drown in this popular stuff, right? Like, okay, this one has recommended this review has come, that has come, and we get to read that. How to do this? Because in the sense you've talked about it, that you trust people and publishers and this and that. But even as a publisher, you might also have certain...
It's your taste.
Yeah.
And my taste is made up of other people.
Yeah.
If you really seriously look at it beyond the filmy nature of the line, it is actually made up of influences around me, both dead and alive.
Yeah.
Right? So the fact that as a school kid, I would travel 2.5 hours to Kharagpur every weekend to spend with a railway officer who was a Jija and who was a railway officer and a bureaucrat, but in his heart was Paradise Lost. He grew up on literature. So he weaned me away from science. He became an influence, right? The theatre became an influence. So all of this sensibility that you inherit in passing, it's the way Sandeepan is shooting, moving from here, taking his camera there. Now, part of my antenna picks up that movement, right? So all of it becomes a layer, influence. Raaste mein aap ja rahe ho, you claim you're a photographer. India offers you a frame every second. It's how you select, etc. So similarly, when you're doing the selection process, every time you say yes to a particular book, it brings a lifetime of all these influences.
Completely.
A conversation with you, Shurandari, or Bishan, or somebody. And so we go in and out in great fluidity out of each other's tastes levels, right? So it's not just me sitting there saying कि मुझे इस type की, हाँ वो भी है. अब जैसे मुझे आप you give me anything that's dark, I'll say yes to it straight away.
Completely.
It's like that.
There's that book, Hospital over there. Right there.
So, that aside. So there's it's intuitive. Then it gets into a method where you have it read, you see what other people think about it, where does it stand, who is the author, is this a debut author?
Yeah.
For example, we once had and this is one last example of how trust works.
Yeah.
You're at Frankfurt Book Fair. आपका छोटा सा स्टैंड है, आपने किताबें सजाएं. You have every half an hour there's an appointment, the way it works. You come, then another publisher comes, I go meet another publisher, that kind of thing. तो एक translator walked in, Katie Derbyshire. She translated for us from the German. Relationship नई थी, we just started. And she came with great excitement and said, there is this young person, 28 years old and Swiss-German, Dorothy L. Meiger करके उसकी एक किताब है, you please get it for me. But then she was confident enough to know this is how we work. You don't have to make pitches for us. So I said, who's published it? So she said, Dumont, which is a Cologne-based German publisher. So I took my appointment sheet and I showed her that the person next is from Dumont, a woman called Judith Habermas, who later turns out to be Jürgen Habermas, the philosopher's daughter. She's the rights manager and she's coming next. So I said, मैं पूछता हूँ उसको. So she's very excited, I'll come back, etc. So then walks Judith, sits down, and before she can even begin to open and show me the books that she wants to sell me, I ask about the book and she does like, this is not fair. I said, Kyun? You're not letting me pitch this book. I came to sell you this book, but you already said yes to it. You know what I mean? So you can say yes because you trusted her.
You trusted her,
Half an hour later, one young person, with slightly short hair, shyly looking around. So I said, Aate visitors. And she turns to Sharandri and me and says, hello, I'm your author. That turns out to be the author of this child who comes. And it turns out to be a beautiful book. Right? That's one kind of trust. 4 years later, she writes another book. You automatically get that.
Yeah.
And you automatically give it to who? The translator.
Yeah.
Translation aati, author ko pasand nahi.
Then?
Doesn't work for her. Now, it's a strange situation. The author loves her because she's introduced her to the English world. I love the translator, I love the author. But to me, author is very vital.
Yeah.
So we figured out what the problem is, and it turns out that the author feels कि भाई ये किताब में मेरा जो style है. Let us say, for example, there's an unpunctuated long paragraph.
Yeah.
Now, if your translator for English-speaking readers tries to correctly, but puts a lot of, that's a problem with the voice. And now it turns out that they can't work together. So the translator very sweetly says, "No, you take it back, don't have to pay me." I said, "Oh, no, that is a given." Then we start a search.
For a translator.
So we try sample 1, pay for it, doesn't work. Sample 2, pay for it, doesn't work. Sample 3, she finds somebody that works. And meanwhile, I'm seeing the transition and seeing how the quality goes up, which means the author's instinct is correct.
Yeah.
So this too is a process that most publishing would not entertain. They'd say, "Nahi, to paise de diye, ye ho gaya."
Yeah.
So therefore, the curatorial instinct of putting things together, the only criteria that all of us had is that it should ring some kind of a bell under the label of human condition, which is a wide umbrella.
Completely.
So आप लुधियाना में किसी विलेज में हैं, वो बवेरिया में कोई और औरत बैठी है, and Ashwanandri very nicely says in the film that her grieving, her loss for her mother and my loss for my mother is the same. Doesn't matter which language you grieve in, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of connect. So I don't have a methodology to this, but it is an ongoing thing. And I think that when I look back, or when you look back after talking to us, is you discover, as I discover, a method. But when you're actually doing it,
you don't have a method.
Right? Now you're doing your outlook. I'm sure you have strategies and plans, etc., and that advance me. But correct me if that's what I'm saying. But there is a sense that I get that you're intuitively finding your way. And then when we look back, we see, "Arey, ye to plan hai." But the plan is retrospective. Because nobody can
predict
that, wonderfully predict what is going to unfold around us as journalists. And you've managed to come very close to a kind of literary journalism.
Because I am a literature student, and that's why
so that's
I
an
love
interesting
literature.
thing.
In my world, which is not as beautiful as yours, for instance, and, we meet all kinds of people, and people have this dismissive, let's say, attitude towards literature. There's this whole thing about facts and figures and data and this and that. And I sometimes have found myself very alone in terms of believing in literature. Because I only read fiction and poetry. I hardly ever read non-fiction, except a few times, like Enrique's Journey by, this LA Times writer wrote it. And
I'm going to give you, sorry, interrupt you, don't lose the thought. I'm going to give you a tiny little non-fiction, which is disguised as some sort of meta-fiction. You have to read it.
No, that I totally
And I promise you'll read it between here and it'll take you an hour.
Okay,
Choti si kitab hai.
I love it.
It's called No Fixed Abode. It's by a French person who died. So it's not about homelessness. It's Chinki choosing to not have a fixed home. It's very beautiful.
It's very beautiful. No, and also I'm talking about those thick books.
Yeah, I understand.
I just
I
nothing
get
against
that.
it, but I can't. I have to have this, imagine landscapes and it's escaping things and all of that. And almost a lot of this politics also comes from there, because how do you talk about human condition? How am I to know about what other person has gone through? I think poetry, because it's compressed and it talks a lot, and through fiction, you have, and that makes you somebody who is at least trying to understand somebody and what they have gone through. And whenever I say to people that literature actually saves us, people are laughing. And because in a non-fiction world like journalism, you're supposed to know facts and historical movements and यहाँ का prime minister ये है, वहाँ का president. I don't think it matters. I think what matters is this human condition. And so how do you do it? Like this literature, what do you think about literature? What is it? Because you have these books of like, poetry books. You have all kinds of, things. And there is this persistence that I'm going to publish this. And what you said, that you are doing that balancing act also, right? Like you are also publishing books that may not sell so much. But there is that.
No, in fact, I'm only publishing. The balancing act is different.
Yeah.
I was told very early in my publishing life or my art life that you need to, if your heart is in this sort of literature and poetry, you need to have a popular line of books.
Yeah.
I don't, because I learned very early कि वो होता नहीं.
It's a trap.
No, it's a trap in the sense that you taste blood of a certain popularity, a certain economics, and then you get more and more, and you grow, and you have that many mouths to feed, then it becomes a trap.
Yeah.
If you keep it small, but you do bigger things, and if you only have this kind of very serious fiction, non-fiction, literature, philosophy, theatre, cinema, poetry, you have no other product that is popular. You have to make these collectively popular.
Yeah.
People ask me, "Isme se kaun si bestseller hai?" So I say, well, I can give you a list of books that we keep reprinting, but we don't have bestsellers.
Yeah.
We try and, it's you see, and that's good old-fashioned publishing. Aapki jo backlist hai. In other words, books you keep in print over the years, which other generations want, versus what most publishing worldwide is now becoming, front list.
Yeah.
Which is, Chinki is well known. She has 4 million followers, and she writes on animal rights. 100,000 copies big gayi. Uske baad, he is not going to bring his grandchild to say कि भाई वो चिंकी की वो किताब देना 50 साल पहले. But you would to a Mahashwata Devi. You might to a Perumal. So it is the content is what is important. So I figured that you have to focus on what you wish to do, not कि भाई मेरा दिल इसमें है पर ये अब करना पड़ रहा है. Then your whole life is apologetic. What is the point?
Completely. And you're only trying to balance.
So the balancing act is a different one. The balancing act, the money, the situation, the economics. We, for example, treat it like it's a collective pot for us. You have the books. Some books sell more to subsidize other books that don't sell so more. That's cross thing. It used to happen in journalism.
Completely.
When popular, it's like we had the wonderful Desh magazine, which was very literary. It used to be presumably funded by the success of the other magazines that were more politically popular. Later, they all became profit centers. The problem with publishing is each book has become a profit loss account. And that's not possible. Then, because we work in translated literature, we're very grateful for support from various cultural institutions. The Goethe, the French Institute, the Italians. So, little sums of money all go into a collective pot. Or like I told you earlier, that we were reinventing the German list, which first comes out in hardback, then in paperbacks. You get support for the paperback like a series. You do the same for the French. So you think of innovative ways of finding resources beyond. You sell rights. Slowly we've begun to represent lots of authors, not just Indian, even international, which you then sell into the languages, European languages, and you get a little money. So there's lots of ways that you do. And the mantra of success is do not complain. Don't beat your chest how difficult it is. Just do the damn thing. The world is not interested. They want to see what you're producing. They're not interested in कि भाई कैसे करते हो. At least they shouldn't be. And so we have survived. This is our 43rd year. So we must be doing something.
No, completely, because the kind of books that you're bringing out, like even
they're not easy,
weather, or like you can know about some human conditions from here. The other thing I wanted to ask you about your theatre experience. You were doing the lighting and all these things, and then you started photography, and you said that it came very instinctively to you because you were setting up the lights and you saw the. I think in some interview you had said that. So a little bit about that, because there is something about this place where everything is coming together in some strange way, and I don't think language is enough to articulate that. But about theatre, about photography, about everything that has gone into making Seagull
a certain aesthetic. No, I started in the theatre as a theatre lighting, like all of us do in this country. where there is still only one big drama school, right? So everything starts as a hobby.
Yeah.
In my case, because I had to start earning a living to put food on the table very early in life, I turned the theatre design part of it as my livelihood slowly. And that's how Seagull started. Later, 10 years later, the books would happen to document that theatre. But the lighting when I came in was a inherited aesthetic, which means through books.
Yeah.
क्योंकि उस ज़माने में young theatre people were hardly going off traveling, ये वो influences नहीं थे. तो British Council libraries थी, American libraries थे. So you looked at photographs of designers and stuff. And everything was what you have here, which is 45-degree angles of light, clearly lit, almost like studio portraiture kind of theatre, which may work for the comedy.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first lit my first play, it was a disaster because I couldn't achieve darkness.
Yeah.
Darkness का मतलब एक spotlight में इसको दे दो, वो अपनी to be or not to be बोल रही है. No, that's not what I wanted. And then I realized that actually in real life, the way light works is that there's never even light. आपका दाहिनी तरफ का चेहरा dark में थोड़ा सा रहता है, नजर आता है, this is bright. So I started to experiment by changing the angles of my spotlights and things. And I wasn't afraid to test audience sensibilities by giving them something that was slightly different.
Yeah.
I also didn't believe in those, you have traditions of a cue, blackout, next scene begins. Mine was fluid. It was like a painting over 24 hours, slowly changing the quality of light. So if I'm speaking and I am the important character, so I may have a tangential beam sitting on me, but there's a little bit of some furniture leg there, some top, something. So the light is... The other thing I discovered was that I learned to light the air around actors, which meant that sometimes when the curtain went up, it looked like a dark stage. Then you saw something, but you couldn't see what it was. The lights were positioned between wing to wing. So एक wing से दूसरे wing में backstage चली गई light, so it's not bouncing on the stage. And then Chinki steps into light and starts to speak, and her face is lit. But when she moves out, she's in the dark. So you started to fool around, and there was no...
And
you had to discover...
To fool around like that.
So it was that sort of an aesthetic. Then you discovered that you could do this with your street photography.
Yeah.
You're walking down, whichever street. You're in Connaught Circus, for example, and you're walking and there's pillars outside. The pillars have the shadow, and the shadows are falling. The sun is against you, and you decide, throw the rule book out and say you're shooting against the light.
Yeah.
So suddenly what is a normal, benign, ice cream eating Chinki looks like some apocalyptic vision because her son is from the back. She's getting exaggerated, something in her mouth. What could it be? So it becomes drama.
Completely.
So gradually, I'm just putting it in a crude way, but gradually the lighting and the street photography started to, so the theatre and that, I started to see the possibility of drama.
Oh, yeah.
And now something interesting has happened where I was told by my artist friend Rekha Rudhwatia, who's just curated an exhibition of my photographs as part of a group show in Baroda. She said something that I didn't understand. It took Shunadri to explain it to me. She said, your camera has disappeared. So if you have, it's like, and I didn't know what she meant. She said, it's somehow as if there is no camera lens between you. And then she gave me examples of other photographers, the formality of it.
Yeah.
And then Shunadri explained to me, because your photographs are beginning to merge into, it could be a print, it could be an etching, it could be a painting. And then I started to see what she meant. And it was all intuitive, or even writing.
Yeah.
So the writing informs in a certain kind of way. It's hard to explain this, as you said, in words. And all of this led to the fact that there was we keep talking in Seagull history of, it's like Jesus Christ, you're talking about before and after Shunadri. So there was an aesthetic before that where I had learned from letterpress and lettertype and block printing to do my covers myself. And when I used to set the inside of each book ourselves. When she came, she expanded the setting of each by letting all our editors set the books.
Yeah.
It is not sent out to a date end. No, it's all in-house setting.
Wow.
So they're close to the author, the poet, the writer. So it works like that.
Yeah.
And she's taught them that. And then when the aesthetic shifted into her sensibility, which meant she's a voracious reader, particularly of crime, for example. So all of that informs
your aesthetics completely.
So similarly, my photography sometimes informs not only the aesthetic, but problem solving sometimes. Like theater teaches you to solve problems. It tries to find solutions somewhere.
In limited circumstances as well.
And also because I am shy initially and I don't like intruding when I'm shooting. And so therefore, often I'm shooting from the hip and, doing all kinds of things. But it's my aesthetic. And again, it's taken a lifetime because I've shown artists and photographers all my life. I couldn't show myself, so I had to be discovered. Similarly, the poetry that's being published is being published by Speaking Tiger because you don't want to publish your own thing.
But why?
It's kind of like, how it is. It's you feel like that's too easy. You want other people to reach out and appreciate and stuff. But there's a whole story of how publishing works and how difficult it was me, even as a first so-called hotshot publisher, to find a publisher. I had so many rejections within this country. And how that played itself out. And then suddenly some Australian found my poetry and published it. And then everybody wanted to publish it. So I tell my would-be authors that it's the same. It doesn't matter who and how influential you see me as. I can't ring up somebody and say, publish kar do. It doesn't work like that. So then you feel better because it's on merit. There's no doubt then that somebody wishes to invest in the book. So, it's a kind of, it's an ongoing, evolving flux. And I think partly we discovered intuitively as an organization that we should always be moving. And moving also means moving on in the sense you don't freeze yourself into an institutional, architectural, dead space, however wonderful it is. You chop, you change, you lose, you have failures, you admit that this one you screwed up, so we have to stop doing this, let's move to something else. So it's actually, there's a whole record of failures that leads to this.
And failure is not a bad thing at all.
So it's not just at the personal level, but even an organization. You learn to recognize the times. And if you're, we all seem to be blessed with this ability to sometimes find ourselves a little out of step with our times. So people who are sympathetic say कि भाई तुम थोड़ा आगे हो, इसलिए people who are not very sympathetic say कि ये क्या कर रहे हो, it makes no sense, you should be doing this. So there's a lot of that. But we've slowly figured that the doing is what is important. Karte raho, keep doing it. And be open to never letting the work get bigger than you. In the sense, or rather, you shouldn't become bigger than the work. Sorry, I said it the other way around. What I meant was, often what happens is, you and I become larger than our work. We think we've arrived, we have all the answers. That is the only conscious thing that we all watch out for, which keeps you on your toes, because you're always trying. And all the one-upmanship is with yourself. I can do this a little better, a little differently. And you can't win it all anyway. But the only thing is that you do it on your terms as much as possible. And so it's an ongoing project.
No, it's very interesting because, that you said very rightly, that people will say, "Arey tum kya kar rahe ho?" Whatever. And anybody who is trying to do anything little bit like off the track in the sense not formula based, they have to go through this. And sometimes it's painful. Because people will like, it's not good. Because we are so embroiled in this world of like ratings and this and that. It's actually sometimes too much pressure also.
Yeah, you face this all the time.
Completely, all the time. Like we wanted to do this resistance poetry issue with Amar Kanwar. And I went to some parties and people were like, how is your CEO allowing you to do this? And this is madness. I said, no, but we believe in it. Like I write poetry. So why shouldn't I publish it? And a magazine doesn't have to be this way. So anyway, so no, it's very difficult because sometimes we break down. Like if they take it for a normal color. Because a lot of time people will say these covers don't work. But you put it out there and you trust like kuch hoega. I wanted to ask you about darkness firstly. Like how do you define it? How do you keep it? How do you channelize it? And how do you not get affected by what's happening around the world and still continue to kind of look at darkness and kind of curate and let other people know that darkness so that they can maybe move towards light or whatever it is. I mean, darkness is not a bad thing per se. It's very interesting how you keep talking about, even in theater, when you were doing the photography, you talk about darkness, right? And the spotlight and light. And it's very away from the normal way of looking at darkness, for instance. So I thought maybe if you could
I can.
That in your practice.
Of course, we get affected by it. I mean, the whole, because if you didn't get affected, there would be not enough energy to do something about it. So, of course, the dark affects you. But I've learned very early, I don't know how to explain this except directly, which is that one doesn't resist darkness. What you do is you do the opposite. Okay, when anything simple, a break in relationship, which is very common, and then the anxieties, the sense of hurt, the loss, the debit credit, all of that, instead of resisting, fighting, getting busy, sometimes it is okay to sit and let it envelop you, embrace you. It can be risky, I suppose, and difficult, because it makes you further and further and further and further and further. And then, like good homeopathy, it fights back on its own. So often so much energy is wasted, I think, in trying to either ward it off or say, hey, all is right with my world. And so what if I lost my mother, or I lost this, or, my leg was amputated, or whatever. I'm saying, no, make it a part of you. And no one method works. It's an individual thing. How you how you as Chinki would cope with anything. Loss of trust in you as editor. A certain kind of depression that comes from that. A relationship, a work ethic, the politics of the time. They can't cripple you. But you invite, it's almost what I'm suggesting is you invite the crippling till it becomes its opposite. It may sound romantic, but that's how I've intuitively, and it all happens, it's not like a conscious sit down somewhere and do it. Chalte firte. Ek to wo hai. And the other thing, of course, is that for either light or dark to survive, they need each other. It is a yin-yang thing, right? So if you talk of theatre, you wouldn't know what the shadows are unless you created them by using light, right? It goes without saying when you take that to some philosophical self-preservation level, and that's important because your self has to be preserved enough to be able to resist, as you put it. You cope with it till it actually becomes, because, when people talk, oh, it's just like a void, it's a totally dark, you can't see anything. If you sit in a dark room for 5 minutes, you start to see things.
And you can actually feel things.
You can see things, you can sense things. And then, we once had a whole Seagull catalogue on blindness.
Really?
Which was very strange, but blindness that is imposed, sometimes inflicted. It's a very interesting sort of concept that we came up with, and we had a very interesting text which almost sounded like Oedipus pulling his eyes out. But actually, that too is about a certain dark, कि भाई इतना कुछ हो रहा है मेरे इर्द गिर्द, मैं देखना नहीं चाहता, मैं रिट्रीट कर रहा हूँ, मैं कहीं और चला गया, मैं I become reclusive. I've been battered, my trust has been handled, people are saying things about me, the social media is attacking me, I retreat for whatever it is, so there's all kinds of darknesses, and it's at different age, different things happen. Like in my photographic practice currently, I'm coping with this in a very nice kind of way. I'm excited with the concept of, in Sudarshan Shetty terms, I want to create a chapel. So if Sudarshan was creating an architectural something, imagine in a field there is something, it doesn't have any crosses or anything.
Nothing.
It's just an interesting place, and you walk in and you see that the daylight is doing some strange things to the pattern, and where it's not a chapel about a Christian God, it is an altarpiece made up of my photographs which show light and shadow and dark and light and shadow. That's it. It's a place for prayerfulness, which means as an atheist, when you shove me into a dark hole with guns pointing at me, and it's the time of Babri and I'm there, I have to reach out to something. And I'm just trying to reach out to a place of calm, not to some murti. Right? So it's that kind of calm, developing it hopefully next, whatever we do. So what I'm trying to say is that your artistic practice, your publishing practice, your dailiness in being with each other is also about not just your self-obsessive darkness.
Or not
it is also about listening to yours, to be able to, if the relationship demands it, talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and teach you also to get in and out of it, right? It's like any conversation can weave in and out of that. Problem becomes when we don't. We're too busy thinking कि भाई इसको मैं ये बोलूँगा तो क्या समझेगा या समझेगी या whatever. I'm saying that what's the worst that can happen? You will get a little slap on your knuckle if you are being too personal or whatever. So you make yourself accessible, not just to the dark, but to the darknesses around you. So it's a different sort of way. And to me, the excitement and the exhilaration, and I can sense when I'm coming out of it, because you're never fully out of it.
Never, no.
And sometimes you actually think, do you want to be fully out of it?
No.
Therefore, what is that state you want to be in? You might as well be dead in some blissful Christian white light paradise. So I don't know, you know. So there's that kind of stuff. I can't articulate it more than one does in one's poetry, for example, you know, which comes from that place. But it's like both knotted grief, which is about all kinds of grieving, both national and personal, and political and intimate, comes from that core. But everybody who's read it comes to me, strangers, and will say to you at these readings that there's a lot of hope. When you read it, you think it's going to depress the hell out of us. Book called Knotted Grief. Ye kya? You know? And that is interesting. I don't set out to create hope. I am sharing a moment. And often people will ask you, for example, just offhand, there's a line that ends Jivraj and my performance of Mother Muse Quintet, which says, I wake up one morning and look at the mirror that no longer reflects my face. And the moment ends. Up somebody in the audience who's very connected with grief says, Ke bhai ye, and tries to interpret it. You know, the complete wiping out of self. I said, no, it's a theatrical image. I see the image and I see it as an ending. Then I look back and give it meaning. So sometimes in poetry, you trust the words that come to you in a certain way, that juxtapose together, that seem unpredictable, that create an image visually, you know, like a photographic frame or whatever. But it all happens intuitively, right? Completely. Then you give it meaning in discussion, where say, good, bad.
Or maybe sometimes you don't even have to.
You don't have to.
Like, you know, your title itself is a very visual thing, Knotted Grief. And, you know, and actually I got this book. There's one section called Selected Griefs, and I was going to ask you about it. You know, you use these phrases very interestingly, and they're just selected. How are you selecting this grief, for instance? And why are you selecting it? The how and the why, and at which point you're selecting it. You talk about Kashmir, and then there's a, where my, you know, these are very short sentences, sometimes only like 4 words on a page, right? And there's one like 8 and 9-year-old children you have written about them. So if you could just read one little bit from here and just from the Selected Grief and talk about the selection of grief, because
why selected
our investment in places and people are also questions, right? So let's say, who speaks for who? And that's a question that faces us as we're also publishing, and you're also publishing, and you're also a writer. Why can't I speak on behalf of Palestinians or Kashmiris or anybody else? Why should anything stop me from doing that? And you have done that in form of poetry. And so I thought maybe I'll ask you to read one bit that, and also talk about that association. Why did you end up writing this book? And the titles, of course.
Say something simple like this, which also connects with what you began about precise, etc.
Yeah.
Forgive me my shy grief.
Yeah.
Flame, waver, hesitate, burn. Now, the moment you start to dissect it, it's very difficult, right? And
but it's so visual.
It's absolutely, you know, you're saying that the grief is there, but it's so intimate. It's impossible to share it in a certain way. So forgive my shyness. So I keep looking for symbols and images to share. Ki, bhai, this is what I'm going through, and so on and so forth. I think the Knotted Grief, the title itself, you know, comes from a poem. I had actually called it Kashmiriyat, but a very dear American editor friend of mine of Grey Wolf Press in those days, Fiona McRae, she went through it, liked it, disliked it, positioned it, turned it around and said, change the name, call it Knotted Grief. And it suddenly, because the knot...
The concertina wires.
You know, the whole concept of knotting as in bond, knotting as in entanglement, knotting as in a solution we can never find for Kashmir. There are all kinds of things. Grief. How do we unknot it? Do we succeed? Do we not succeed? Do we want to succeed? Do we move on and keep the
knots inside?
Gati hui cheez apne andar. So it's a kind of just a thing. But the poem itself is braided silence. Gut banana. So braided silence, learning to live with knotted grief. You do your own thing when you sing the grieving. Yes, you do your own thing when you do sing your grieving. Knotted silence, braided grief. Yes, you do learn to do your own thing. Knotted braids, grieving silence, knotted braids, grieving silence. Hear it yourself first, slowly, then in rhythm with your own silence. Braided grief. You learn to chase your gods into a corner, hide their light, plunge into darkness, tie them up in knotted grief. Braided silence. So it's a kind of revenge. You know, gods, you know, so you're at war, even with your quote unquote believing creator.
It is true.
So, you know, so the whole thing here is that you, whether it's silence, you still hear it. There is no such thing as a pure silence in the rest of it. So, and selected griefs is really just it's like giving a section ahead where you're actually, so you start the book with a long 110 poem thing called Kashmiriyat. And then you have a different section, and you have a section where you select different kinds of grieving that you have undergone. And it's just a practical thing of putting together like a borderlessness of grief. You go from a very personal, intimate one to some other loss to...
And all losses connect with each other.
And they all connect with each other. And Kashmir actually goes back, it's very simple. My father was in Lahore, he used to work for the Oberois. During partition, he stayed back, he was kept by his friends who looked after him to smuggle out stuff. Oberoi, old man Oberoi, was loyal to him, so he gave him a job at the Oberoi Palace in Kashmir. My sister was 5.5 years older, I was 4 and 5. So, but it's just that I have inherited or made up strange memories of Kashmir from then. And I didn't know that across decades, when I never went back, what would haunt me constantly, and enough for me to start Megha started this program where we used to bring 15, 16 kids twice a year from 9 to 17 from conflict zones of Kashmir for something simple like a theatre workshop, kabhi kiya nahi, a visit to a cricket match one day, or to sleep over at school, other school kids, to attend classes in
like
normal supposed whatever you can create by way of normal. So there was no funding for this, you just did it, right? And then it stopped. 5th of August 2019 stopped it all. And it's a small pocket, You seek out that darkness, make it your own, bring it here, you seek out that grief. So my Kashmir is a kind of constant grief, hope thing where there's a helplessness.
Yeah.
There's an imagined sense of what must be going on, but it's not reportage. I am not there on the streets sending you filing reports and so on and so forth. Therefore, the Kashmiriyat is what it is, which is a imbibed something,
Yeah.
which is connected in some grateful way to a very wonderful childhood of a certain kind,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where do you get a childhood where you're sitting on your mother's lap? She's some assistant food and beverage manager's wife. And the hotel is below. The quarters for staff are up there on the hill. And you have a father who brings home Kishore Kumar, Padmani, Ragni, Nargis, Sunil Dutt, who are discovering both romance for each other and the romance for Kashmir. And they all sit around and have kadi chawal and kheer. And my father used to sing very well.
Yeah.
And Kishore wants to listen to the other Kishore singing Kundan Lal Seagull.
Oh.
And this is your childhood memory of going to sleep on somebody's lap.
Yeah.
So you're getting a strange, later,
Yeah.
your mother will grow into telling you, she was very good at telling stories.
Yeah.
You go to every Friday in Kashmir, they had a box.
Mm.
You'd see their Guru Datts come back, and through the cooking and everything else, she would be telling you the scene by scene.
Mm.
And then you can later grow up and you say, oh, but her father was a screenplay writer.
Yeah.
So, there are connections of that sort. So Kashmir, definitely, and the book itself is, of course, about the ongoing, this is our Palestine.
Yeah, it is actually.
It's going to stay like that. And
there's a lot of, I feel that empathy, and the one wonderful thing is that despite all the darkness, you've maintained the trust. You continue to do that.
Of course.
It's a very brave thing to do. And it's not possible.
It's like we handled the, we were very close to Mahashwata there.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about her was then we handled her estate and her son's estate, and now Tathagata, who's the third generation, he's writing. So with her, it was a very interesting relationship where very soon you discovered a kind of directness which had nothing to do with theoretical understanding of either feminism or
no, not at all.
A certain not that the reading wasn't there. The reading was there, the research was there, all of that. But there was an intuitive urge to throw herself physically into the fray, into a situation, into the injustices.
Yeah.
Pick up a phone, call up a chief minister because she had access, or a policeman, or whatever. I'm saying that this is a person who was solving, becoming part of it, lending her name, filing. But there was that sort of life and writing.
Yeah.
And if you look at the old tradition of people like Tilly Olson, the wonderful writer of color, people, whenever they tell me about complaining about too much work, too much this, too much that, I'm saying, here are these people, alcoholic husbands, battered shitless, many kids, but they find time for themselves to write, because that's also a form of resistance.
Completely.
With no thought of publishing. I mean, I have many stories of how you write for the self and no thought of the marketplace. I've also had stories of how this wonderful German writer, who I'm in great correspondence with, 30, 40-page letters, it's a whole different story, but who decided in 2007 to step out and stop being published at the height of his whatever.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, his reasons for it. Now, I may not have agreed with the reasons, but I respected, in the same way you talked of Chitravanu.
Yeah.
Chitravanu decides to
step away,
destroy his paintings at a particular time in life. I object to it, but I don't, it's his work.
It's his work,
Or if your painting was flaking and you gave it to him, or he would be bored with what you had bought, he would take it and just change it into something else which you may or may not like, but you respected that process.
Yeah.
So there are lots of things in the arts that kind of happen. And Mahashwata was also very important, because in some bizarre ways, she triggered off the writing impulse, because she would often tell me, you must write. And then she passed like a fatwa saying, ke bhai, har din. tease them, you send me something each time. So you kind of do that. Or we used to do recorded interviews for catalogues. And each year, this sort of catalogue, there was one devoted to Bhashata only, because 28 kitabein, 30 kitabein. So we would sit, her bed was in the middle, a cassette recorder, and I would be taking black and white photographs. And she and I would be talking. Sometimes she would be mischievous and say, intimacy for intimacy. I will tell you something about my intimate life, and you will basically wanting to know about sex life, so to speak. And I'd say, okay, and I would put my bit off, not to be recorded. She knew, but she'd tolerate it. Cheating kar raha hai. But I'm saying it's this is a relationship thing. And so there was
you've found so many now.
In fact, if you will allow me, there's a what I call I got this for you. It's called Hazar Chorasi from Mahashwata, which was last year. This is the Hazar Chorasi Ki Maan, the kitab. The mandolin splays the night. The street waits for the girl to walk all over it. The girl takes her chalk and slits the street like you would an unwilling throat. Ek haath, du haath, as she hops from one numbered square to another. Asan them, she mutters as she turns on number 10 hopscotch and hops back on bloody feet. The man finishes clothing the naked mannequin with care, whips out a pistol and shoots it in the eye once, twice, thrice. Day after day, she wakes up to her breathlessness. The whole idea is it kind of sums up the Naxalite period, and this is like a tribute to her writing of, so this too is from a dark space and a dark part of our history in Calcutta in a certain kind of way. So
it's beautiful, actually, and it's so evocative also.
So it's cinematic. I'm partly thinking of a film that didn't work for me, which is Govind Bhai's film. But, there's a kind of thing, cinematic. The cinema is, and the photographic frame is very much, you kind of tend to see things. But sorry, I'm digressing.
No, and it's a hopscotch thing that you talk about. We've all played it in childhood, and it's kind of like, you relate. I think people are not relating much to each other.
कोई गुल्ली डंडा नहीं खेलता.
नहीं खेलते हैं. कहाँ थे आप? सोशल मीडिया पे बैठ बिजी रहते हैं.
Spinning tops, lattu, marbles.
And we used to have this one game called Pitto and
Pitto, 7 tiles.
And then we had something called Dinga Pani and all that, and it was this childhood that we had, I think, which anchors us now also. I don't know what's going to happen with the next generation.
No, I'm fine. They'll find their own anchors.
I guess. I hope so. The other thing I wanted to ask about, which has bothered me also for a long time, and in fact, we just had a discussion in our office the other day and said that let's stop the practice of writing reviews. And, I was...
Stop the practice of writing.
Writing reviews. I mean, I think, because firstly, I think it's totally unfair to, in a sense that, let's say, you have written something and I'm coming from a very different space and I may just not like you. And I become this reviewer and then I just smash it. And then a lot of people go by these reviews and buy books and read or whatever. And I think, on Instagram, and Suchitra Vijayan had posted this whole thing about reviews.
Who had?
Police Project.
Yeah, of course. Suchitra, very dear friends. Yeah.
So she basically posted about this review, and it got me to think that, and then we had a discussion that, if you don't put review in the, whatever, headline or whatever, or section, then Google won't pick it up. You see, we are operating under such this
I get it.
And I said, I don't care. I think we should just do it like my take, let's say. And my take is just my take because where I'm coming from, how I'm looking at things, but it should no way be a commentary on the writer per se, right? Because the writer may have come from a very different place. Who am I to judge anything? So I also wanted to ask you about this publishing business, and sometimes when you walk into a bookstore or you see the titles and you see these authors, I mean, also it's depressing sometimes that, and so many books get rejected because they're so political or so dark or whatever. So this whole thing of publishing and this review business, this whole model that we have.
The dependence.
We get a lot of these review requests, and the pitch is almost always like, this person is a big influencer or whatever, and therefore, and also there's an expectation that the review has to be really good. So I just wanted to...
many things. First of all, I am You know, I mean, sort of, I don't have much faith in reviews.
Yeah, me too.
I haven't thought it through like you have, for whatever reason. I just feel two things.
Yeah.
One is, if you're going to review something, then create an environment, an ecology of, first of all, giving space to literature.
Yeah.
Now it's boiling down to you making some feeble attempt and Hindu trying to fight, but fashion wins, you know, Rosella's having a hard time. So if there is an environment like it used to be in the old days, you know, when space was devoted, you looked forward to intelligent writing. Editors didn't just give books out to people. They found matches, they discussed things. Also, something that's happened recently, which is that you've always had reviewers who attacked personally for reasons beyond the book, which I understand. It's happened to us in theatre, it's happened in art. Okay, fair enough. That's one thing. But when you have an editorial responsibility, and this I don't have an answer for, if you as an editor get a review, it's perfectly all right to be critical, but when you get a review where you as an editor or your editing team or some copy person cannot tell the difference between a vindictive something which is attacking me because you don't like my socks, or then what is your role?
Exactly.
Do you get back to the person? Do you temper it? Whatever the thing. So there's all these issues at play. But in a place where very little space is devoted and restricted, I would rather do what you did with the Tathagata thing, which is you talk to the person, maybe do a conversation around the book. It's to do with, for example, what I was telling you, we're doing a whole series in Calcutta and at G5A in Bombay, where as a kind of response to something I'm actually spent years being affectionate about, which is a certain kind of literary fest culture, where the multiple, you know, it's become a numbers game. 400, Hamare festival, 500, 600. So you have 9 people, 8 people. I was recently invited to the Lit Fest where the other 6 people and a moderator, and me, that's 8 people, 45 minutes. And the biodata of these 6 people, usme 5 bande, they started saying influencer, I am an influencer. And I'm saying, why do you have me on it? Or read 3 minutes of poetry, 9 people, 45 minutes. Why do you bother? So versus you go to something like Penang or you go to Kuala Lumpur where my friend Pauline Fan does these fests. 1.5 hours of conversation, no overlaps. You finish one room, you go and listen to that. You know, there are ways of doing this. So I thought we'll curate a Life of the Mind series, which is a
great idea.
You know, so where you have the author center stage, the book is there. The market is there on a table. You can buy the book when you want to. But we're not discussing the book just now. We're discussing what is the author going through today? What is the horror process? Or whatever she or he chooses. And then you have an interlocutor who takes off from there, weaves in maybe the book or the writer thing, or maybe not bring in the book, just talk life. Just talk like you and I are talking in a certain kind of way. And it's all right to stop abruptly. Okay, अब 1.5 घंटा खत्म हो गया. That's also okay. किताब है आपको अगर 2 बंदों से प्रेम हो गया instantly जाके खरीदिए नहीं, you know. So definitely in the publishing there's one of that. The other problem that I have a thing which stems from these conversations with Romila, where some years ago I got something called the Ottaway Award, and so she was all excited with it and said, why is this excitement not shared within the community? I said, no, individual friends in publishing are quite happy and pleased. He said, no, I don't mean me getting you TV attention or, you know, Chinki writing about you in the Outlook or whatever. I mean, why are the publishers not getting together in some space and celebrating? I said, what are you saying? I said, look at surviving in the publishing world today. First of all, who are the publishers in this country? When Chinki comes from Guardian UK to do a story on how much Indian publishing is thriving, who does she talk to? Hachette, Harper's, Random, Bloomsbury. Does she go to Zuban? Does she go to Leftward? Does she, you know, Yoda Press? I mean, does she go to the Independents, Women Unlimited? She doesn't, because then they paint a whole different, so it's a whole different picture. So in a publishing world where 2014, 2019 have made balancing act, you know, you have so much of the certain kind of literature coming out. You walk into our bookstores, they look wonderful like bookstores, but when you look at the content, it doesn't offer you a world any
Nothing.
longer. It offers you a certain new India. Journalisms it's become open season on journalisms. Young journalists have been in touch with me who've written one brilliant article for, say, The Time, and are working for The Wire and then move on to Frontline or whatever. Young people in their 20s are being pressured with 5 lakh advances कि भाई अभी किसी subject में लिख के दो क्योंकि बिक रहा है. You would be approached as yourself and say कि भाई Chinki has enough influence, उसके नाम से 3,000 copies हम बेच सकते हैं, कुछ भी लिखो. You're a radio jockey of absolute wonderful empathy with the world, and you get commissioned to do something, and you don't have the book.
No, and also I think you should write when you are ready, and you have something to say. I remember. And
you should write it before you're ready to share it.
Exactly.
It's a kind of strange thing.
And you should not write for. I had this one strange thing, and after that I lost faith in publishing. So I had this stalker. No, I have faith in you, but I had this stalker problem, and I had written about it, and how I went.
तुम तो मेरे लिए लिख रही हो ना एक work of fiction.
Yeah, I'll
That's what you said.
And I got this publishing people, been approached many times, and they said, you should write this book from the point of view of a tech guy sitting in Bangalore who has a lot of disposable income and he can do anything on an afternoon. So why should he pick up your books, make it sensational? I said, I don't want to write like a crime thriller because that's not how it happened to me, right?
No, it doesn't happen to anybody.
Problem, there's a lot of mental strange things, Like even if a cat would come to my house and drop a plate, I would think stalker aa gaya. So it was more about overcoming the strange nervousness around me. But nobody was interested in that process. People were interested in this one guy stalking, breaking into my house, things like that. Which I thought was random. Like, how do you... And then, there's this thing that I said that, I don't want to write fiction and non-fiction both. I just want to write something which can be... because when I talk to my aunt about her dreams, they may not just be real, but they meant something to her, meant something to me. Nobody is willing to publish it because they want these categorizations. So I thought it was...
No, that's wonderful. I think you should. You see...
But how many people are like this?
There are enough people like me. That's not the issue. My point is that I, for example, this rings a bell because I'm currently preoccupied with a word that I'm using randomly called gesture.
Yeah.
So there are bad gestures, there are good gestures, there are all kinds of things. It's like, say, I reach out in affection and we have enough intimacy for me to do what Mahashwada used to do. She used to keep on doing this after a while and all the rest of it. And you like it, that's fine. Or you're intimate with your partner who suddenly ruffles your hair in affection, but does it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And you say, you cringe, So it's a bad gesture, but unintended.
Yeah.
And then there is the deliberately predatory bad gesture of touching you the wrong way. So there are all these gestures that are floating around. There's also the political gestures. कि आप बोल रहे हो, कर रहे हो, हो गया, बोल दिया ना, हो गया. Move on to the next thing, whereas the problem remains. So recently, for example, again, personal lens, etc. But I'm working on a small performance, which will be around the trees I told you about the rest of the thing. It's nothing. Say you walk into this room, and this room is 30, 40 feet. It's a big space, right? Or you just walk in and you see that there's just black polythene, 30 feet by 20 feet. And there are crushed sheets of paper, करीब 120, just चारों तरफ. And then you get used to some light and there's some sound coming. And you see there's a shadowy figure of a woman in some nondescript shape. And you have just walked in and there she's sitting amongst the debris of this crushed paper. और कुछ अजीब से sounds आ रहे हैं which you recognize as street sounds. Is this a forest sound? या कोई पेड़ गिर रहा है? या suddenly you hear a male voice or a woman voice. And you're wondering, oh, ये उठती नहीं है क्यों? And other people of you are walking in and gathering and wondering, ये कोई नया art है? ये क्या हो रहा है? What is wrong with Sudarshan? That kind of thing. And then 10 minutes of trying your patience, the woman gets up. And all she does on her knees, because we know the image of women on knees throughout history, they swipe the floor. ये बेचारी क्या करती है? एक कागज खोलती है, the sound paper being open, and she tries to smoothen the creases.
Yeah.
Her hands going black because each of the 100+ sheets are a printed tree, a photograph of mine.
Ah, okay.
And she's trying to crease in. Just that act. This is all she does. Again, you're getting impatient. Ki kya kar rahi? Kyunki aajkal attention
Patience ही नहीं है
spans.
हमारे पास.
For 15 minutes, she does this. And then suddenly, she gets up at a particular moment and looks at a handiwork of her, having opened up all these 100, surrounded by these strange trees. And then, like the bed cover that you make for your double bed, she comes to the corner of the plastic, lifts it up dramatically, gets under it, like you do in an MRI machine.
Yeah.
And she goes, and becomes like a giant wave, like an earthquake of all this paper floating around. And then it stops. All of this takes 18 minutes.
Yeah.
She comes and she stands in the audience, and she too is watching what's left behind.
Yeah.
And that's it. Now, ye kya hai? At a crude level, is it a climate change message? Is it just a gesture unexplained for an actor at that moment to arouse some emotion, but you're not in control as the creator or director?
Or what emotion is going to evoke in somebody? Yeah.
So now, ये भूल गए. अब ये आपने जो कहा कि I talked to my masi or this, do them like gestures, not explained. You get in midstream.
Yeah.
Chinki jumps into a conversation जहाँ उसको 20 minutes में 2 minutes में she had a revelation right about those 2 minutes.
Yeah. No, it's true because it's a...
You understand?
Yeah.
So that's on 11th January. Come and see it.
No, I'll come and see. And I'm going to write it all down. And the other thing I wanted to ask about Calcutta, because you've been here and, you know, I haven't been to Calcutta that many times, but 2-3 times only I've come. And Snigdhendu, who works with Outlook, Calcutta, yeah, aap mile kal unse. So wo keh rahe ki, you know, this is an iconic place, cultural thing. And I had no idea because I have known you like just as a person who corresponds with me at times, you know. And
what is an iconic place? Calcutta?
No, Seagull.
Oh, Seagull.
For instance, you.
Oh, God.
He said you were a cultural icon. And
oh, no.
So I just wanted to ask you
I don't want to be a cultural
the
anything.
city itself.
The city.
Because every city is a character in a way, right? And like I'm from Patna, so like I feel that Patna has something really interesting to offer. And I go to all these old bookstores where you know, अभी भी Maxim Gorky का that mother translation, माँ, हर किताब का window में, you know, dusty bookshelves, and absolutely this basement and all, वो हिंदी translation करते थे वो ज़माने में. It's a delight, and it's one of those old world which you don't find really, you know, there are so many commercial spaces. But here there is some kind of peace, you know, and he said it's very beautiful too. So I just wanted to talk to you about Calcutta. You know, you opened Seagull here in 1982. What led you into it, and just about the city and how it continued, how it has evolved, and publishing itself, how it has evolved.
This is a recent point for me because my friend, the musician Jivraj, who's a very quiet, solitary being, but not solitary as in lonely, he's just solitary.
Yeah.
And who keeps asking me often as a young person, कि तुम कैसे रह गए यहाँ?
हाँ.
तुम्हारे इर्द गिर्द. You know, the Siddharth Basu's migrated. Of course, Siddharth, I keep telling them, just it's a Bengali name and a Bengali by birth, but he was always in Delhi. Or Jayant, my friend Jayant and Guru Kriplani, they went off to Bombay, or Shumitra, all my early influences. And then they came back after 40 years. But the important thing here is his question was the chaos of the city.
Yeah.
What is it that kept you here? What is it that nurtures you? And I said, you know something? One level, I've always thrived in a certain chaos.
Yeah.
2, if you look at it from age 13, in the nicest possible way, I have provided, in all senses of the word, economic and intellectual, both in terms of family and sustenance.
Yeah.
When my friends used to tell me that, oh my God, you lost your innocence, you were looking after your parents. I said, no. I was dancing every night in Blue Fox to Pam Crane and Louis Banks. I used to dance well. and I was doing theatre and I was earning.
Yeah.
All my Western peers that we used to look after, क्योंकि अभी तक Levi's नहीं आया था, कोई जाता था एक Levi jean ले दो, were working cafes and pizza parlors to earn and study.
Yeah.
And I was that unique entity that was not dependent in my circle of friends who was doing that. So I never missed it because I never missed everything.
Yeah.
Calcutta was a given to me. It never struck me that I could be anywhere else.
Yeah.
I never focused on it. So I said, I'm guilty of not focusing on Calcutta till you point my direction on it.
Yeah.
I just assume it is
This
there.
is for your place.
You know, and that what we've created is not an island.
Yeah.
It's not a cutoff point.
No.
It is a oasis of sorts, right?
Yeah.
And it's happened again. I go back to this whole thing of how you're a sum of all the other imaginations, people, colleagues, people who visit, you know, place where a Mahashata would walk in, being abusive in affection, or Mrinal Sen, you could hear his footsteps coming up the steps. Nobody does appointments. Yeah. Even now you can come and get a meal here. You know, it's like that. So to me, yes, but my intellect acknowledges that we've also become an echo chamber. Hum aise the. So I disagree with our friend a little bit. Culturally, hum kitabein padhte the, hum films banate the, hum natak karte the ek tarike. So it's become like an echo of what we used to be. But what are we today? For last 2 decades, I feel there's an exhaustion. Yeah. A lot of young people try, some succeed, and then move on. Who are coming back? The young to look after the older ones, or whatever realities. But there is, despite all that, accidentally is still surviving palpable hospitality to this city, which keeps it going. Right? The people, which the other cities to some degree have lost.
They're losing it. I mean, look at Bombay, for instance. The mills, which were about the mill workers, have suddenly leapt into some luxury, like high-end luxury. So I don't even understand what happened in the middle. At least Calcutta, Snigdhendu was saying that it has place for people who are still, you know, that jhola mein hai, kitabe pad rahe hai. There is a space for that. Otherwise, there's so much aspiration and ambition.
So the city is part of us. We take it for, you don't take it for granted कि भी हमेशा रहेगी, because it's a changing, evolving thing. But there is a kind of relationship.
There is,
of concern and affection. It's, you get angry, you get upset, but that's true of, I suppose, but at the same time, my idea of home, as well.
What is home?
You know, my idea of home is actually, strangely enough, is my literary life. Which started with Badal Sarkar, Mrinal Sen, Satyajit Ray, books, Habib Tanveer, Shyam Benegal, and Tadur Gopalakrishnan, Jabbar Patel, Satish Alekar. And then suddenly in 2005, it became Bonhoeffer and Googie and Kluger and Ensis. Everybody I grew up reading, I was publishing. So it's like living a dream.
And also living in many homes.
You know? And so to me, the literary life grew magically and organically. And therefore my home, I was at home anywhere in the world in the nicest possible way. And yet, this is the same person who would tell you that every time I used to leave the city for 3 days, because some mama as a school kid would give you, Rajdhani shuru hui thi, 75 rupaye ki shared ticket hoti thi ek way, and then it became 125. One mama would pay one way to Delhi, the other would pay for the other way back. But I would not leave till I had my return ticket. Ki dar lagta tha, ki Delhi mein mujhe bahut dar lagta hai. Even though I was in a protected Daryaganj environment with all these lovely mamas behind Golcha, buying me garam gulab jamuns. And now the garam gulab jamuns are still there. And the mamas are no longer there, but my publishers buy me those. So
that is true.
So it's a kind of relationship. My fear of Delhi became relaxed when I started to drive in the city in borrowed cars. Bombay was always comfortable. I found Bombay very professional on a workload. You know, I was designing theatre, lighting, all that kind of stuff. But one was comfortable. But Calcutta has always been a kind of, you see, the thing about nurturing is you can't wait for this thing called a city to nurture you.
No.
You have to be proactive about the
and you have to build that city also.
You can't sit back and say, bhai, ab main culturally mujhe nurture karo.
No,
you have to be doing things. You can't, it's the same thing that we talked about in the beginning about resisting the times in a certain way. So you have to resist the negativities that a city tries to sometimes, you know, all of that. It's like when Shunandari was translating Herbert, retranslating it, Navarun, and I was reading it. I wrote 62 poems of my Calcutta in the 70s. On the trot in like a week. It was a very strange reliving, not nostalgic at all. From the Naxal times to a certain wonderful, thriving Anglo-Indian community, Armenian community, Jewish community, Chinese community. आस्ते आस्ते सब चले गए.
No, even the act of remembering is political itself, because you're remembering not the othering, but the togetherness.
So there was all of that sort of stuff.
No, it's great. And then one last question I had, and I think it's also about, you talked about your Last Supper that you're putting up in churches.
Yeah. Madhvi
Parikh's work, and there's all these interesting things about, again, darkness and light, and places that are not predictable in that sense. That where would you? So you do a lot of these so-called chaotic things. How do you balance? Like, how do you go home? Like, what is a day in your life?
My day is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And it usually begins with making fresh coffee for colleagues. And so if you walked in and wanted to be a fly on the wall, you wonder, kya gappe laga rahe hain? It's some government office. And yet so much gets done in that gup shop. So my role increasingly has changed from a very hands-on thing, because you have very reliable bunch of people that work with you on this, into a kind of part curatorial, part resource gathering, but you always have to be on your toe. The providing has not stopped since whatever. So you have to be, that is there. And because we were always showing from the late 70s art and photography, but we're not a gallery.
Yeah.
And yet we handle the estate of somebody like a K.G. Subramanian.
Yeah.
And then there are also relationships like Manu Parekh, Madhvi Parekh, Mahmood Laskar, Shomnath Ho, Reba, all of that stuff. The antenna is always open to showing something interesting or new. And the lack of a formal architectural gallery space doesn't bother me, because there are places available. And in the old days when we were showing Chitramanu or showing Subramanian, we were getting old buildings, which pre-demolishing, you waiting as the owner, and you said, Naveen, tu kar le. I said, license milega to go ahead, then I'll have to break it in a week. So you did all this kind of stuff on borrowed spaces. So before it became fashionable here. So it's a kind of pot. It's not just segregated publishing or just school of publishing or history.
A lot of stuff.
It's a kind of, as I said, you respond to the times in different ways, and you make yourself heard in different ways. So when in 2011 or whatever, Madhvi Parekh, she had put together these wonderful glass paintings in the tradition of the glass painting, the reverse act, large ones, almost like mortal beaten silver. The churches used to have these big etchings, and she was influenced by a trip, I think, to Jerusalem and somewhere in Russia, and she came back and did this body of work. Now, I had presented her before, but I said, why would I want to show this strange work by an Indian artist in a white cube?
Yeah.
So I decided to do it in churches. And the idea was that you leave them around. So the experience of walking into a space is not the art gallery space, which is why I want you to see the trees. They're not on the wall.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you could be leaning against some church pillar. It's a heritage thing. You don't want to nail it. Yeah,
like challenging the functionality of a place itself.
And you do it in a way that you do not interfere with the solitude or the seeking of the believers or the non-believers or the visitors or the tourists into that church property. And slowly the art grows beyond the openings. It grows. So the opening resembles an art event in any part of the world, but in a location.
Yeah.
It's the later that interests me.
Yeah.
कौन quietly Chinki जाके वहाँ बैठती है अपना सोचती है. वो हाथ जोड़ने लायक भी नहीं हो, अपने आप को ना समझे, but वो बैठती है कि भाई कुछ चाहिए. I like the quiet that a church offers me, or a kind of old ancient temple not inhabited or practicing offers me, or whatever. So the idea was leave them for 3-4 months for congregations that frequent these spaces of whatever. So that's kind of worked. And now as part of Siddharth, who I never can't say no to, is curating the Bengal Biennale. So they're opening this they're showing it at St. James's Church. Which is a very beautiful thing. Yeah, so we've shown things in all kinds of...
No, it's also very interesting, because I was listening to you yesterday, and I thought maybe I'll ask you for some of the images so that we can use it in our issue.
No, of course, images.
Never-ending war.
You see, the interesting thing is that everybody...
You come here, you go back with so much.
No, I don't mean that. I mean, say Madhvi, for example, is in Delhi, you can talk to her. Now, here's the thing, whenever somebody tries to interview an artist, they bring their reading.
Yeah.
But you cannot bring your reading as an agenda.
Yeah.
तो अगर आप प्रीकंसीव नोशन से आई हैं कि भाई नवीन की पब्लिशिंग मैं समझ चुकी हूँ, अब मैं उसको ये पूछूंगी, the moment I deviate, that becomes a problem. So with somebody like Madhvi, who is an intuitive being, that doesn't work. So many years ago, I did a catalogue for an exhibition with her, where I just made her reenact the story she remembered from her childhood. Gujarati में.
Yeah. That's.
उसको translate करते हैं. So छोटी little strange things somebody had told her, उनकी कहानी, some memory. That was the catalogue.
Yeah.
Now you come in as a critic and you get annoyed कि ये तो बताता नहीं कि ये पेंटिंग में क्या कह रही है, ये पेंटिंग में क्या कह रही है.
क्यों बताना है actually?
Exactly. तो ये चितवानु का भी ये होता था. My God, I remember one or two women journalists who were very upset. They were dear friends. Then they understood. They would walk into Lalit Kala in Delhi, all floors taken up, 148 big works, 6 feet, 8 feet. They would disappear. The catalogue didn't help them because it had a strange text. Every work of the 148 was untitled. So एक बंदा आके कहता है, भाई, I'm sorry, but this is, what does he think he is? This is so masculine, everything is so large. Hello? He has the freedom to paint the way he wishes to. And you guys aren't helping. There's nothing to... How do we... I said, you have to make your own stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Does it move you? She said, yes. I said, well, exactly. Does it disturb you? Does it make you happy? That's the whole into art. Don't dismiss it by saying, I don't understand art. Then don't come.
No, because people are afraid of feeling, actually.
You see, the feeling they will get.
Yeah, but
they're
admitting
afraid
to it
of telling Chinki in a vulnerable way. The fear is कि वो क्या सोचेगी मेरे fears के बारे में.
Exactly.
Whereas it doesn't matter, you know. So there is that is a.
No, that is always there because you're so afraid of like. No, also there was this. There is still this whole thing about using all these heavy words and jargon and all that in curatorial notes, which sometimes and this is from my reportage. Even the artist doesn't understand.
No, my point is कि अगर आपको if you need 1,500 words to explain on the wall, you've lost me.
Yeah.
I want the wall to speak to me.
Yeah.
Then I'll read the words. That's a different thing. Then it adds to insight. That's a different thing.
No, also why should I get lost in this like jargon? I think I should be able to feel and articulate.
No, you have to see, I would even go further and empathize with the fact that what you and I see as jargon is their truth.
Probably.
Let us assume it.
Yeah.
So if there is their truth, then all I want is to be allowed to find my way. I don't want
to get lost in that.
To be said that this only works, this work on the floor or wall, or if you read this first.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
So that is the problem because I think we are being guided by this press release kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And you got another sheet. So I thought maybe if you could read
I've actually got 2 sheets.
Yeah.
You remember the date today?
Today is 6th December.
Of December. Why is that important? 6th of December. Ki hoy chelo bolo to okay.
See, you remember.
So, I have a text I wrote then. It's slightly longish. Are you good for 2 sheets or are you good for 1 sheet?
No, please read. We don't want to stop.
So this is one breathless sentence and it needs an actor and I'm not one. This is part of 2 such texts which were written at that moment in angst. The candle's last act before it sank into its grave of wax was to caution us of the long dark that would shroud the city like a cloud that has known nor beginning nor end, nor even a break, for many miles in a sky that had disappeared as soon as it had appeared in what may have been a millisecond of sunlight, for it wasn't enough, it had warned, to live the life of the shadow, safe and unaffected by the glare of light, unaware that the dark would soon starve the white of the wall, leaving you no space to walk or run or maneuver in a manner that would not make you uncomfortable or claustrophobic or simply sad that things had to turn out the way they had, for the candle had told the truth in its dying moments, saying that there would be no place left to hide your head in shame that will surely follow, like the price that is lurking behind every corner of the mind. For we must remember that there is always a price to be paid, like the stranger you had picked up last night and to whom you had made unsatisfactory love. Because that was the only way you knew to hurt yourself, more and more, as had become the norm, or a habit, as you often called it, and therefore, like all habits, it must be paid for, because Cassandra had not lied or covered up. On the contrary, she had merely acted her part, remembering in the nick of time that sometimes it is better not to look the present in the eye, as it were the future you had so badly wanted to escape, and step back into your past. In fact, she had pleaded that it would be a folly to run out into the eclipsed noon sun, for it may blind you into the fate of the blind man whose countenance hides the frenzy of the seer that is running amok inside the four, or are there 6 walls of his head, in a dance that would make faint the dervishes that had taken control of his body and maybe even his soul, that very part he had used so effectively while bargaining with the Dark Prince, who was now ready to Shylock his part of the contract, regardless of the bloodletting that would definitely follow, as often it does after such nights, when those that rule sharpen their blades and get ready to slit throats, on a night that will only be remembered for its length, and the blood-curdling screams of women and children who should not have met the fate divined for them by those that are marching the route of the long knives, taking part in the pogroms that ravage my poor country, while I watch from my place in exile, playing with the paralysis that only the impotent know, when it is their turn to impregnate the bride on that first night when a womb will shed tears of blood that will raise a mere giggle from the servants, who will whisk the sheet into the morning wash, while you and I will await the tide in a dress rehearsal for our final drowning. It's kind of, tangentially that angst that I couldn't channelize any other way. And the current preoccupation, which we shall end on a slightly happy note, if you like, which is a 2-language thing. खोखले शब्द सूखे रेगिस्तान की याद दिलाते हैं, कमबख्त बढ़ती उम्र, बदलती हुई हाथों की लकीरें और चंद यादों की धुंधली याद के सहारे इस दिल को अब जनाब हम बहलाते हैं. You watch with fear, your hands changing even as you write, the veins more visibly furrowed, the skin less taut, folded, a fleeting freshness that has taken leave without saying goodbye. You feel dizzy at the thought that soon you will lose your grace or your strength. Collect then the voices and the words and the wind, so that you may show your friends these traces of ghosts.
Thank you so much. This was really beautiful.